Judith Butler, a leading philosopher and gender theorist, has much to offer in the way of thought-provoking lessons that can inspire us as we enter the new year. Her work invites us to reconsider identity, power structures, and the very nature of our existence in relation to others. Here are some of Butler's philosophical insights that can guide us into 2025. 1. Understanding the fluidity of identity. Judith Butler's work on identity, particularly in gender trouble, offers a revolutionary view that we are not born with fixed identities but instead perform them through a series of repeated actions and cultural practices. This concept of performativity challenges the essentialist belief that identity is inherent and static. Rather, Butler suggests that gender, and other identities, is something that is constituted through repeated acts and behaviors, which are socially regulated but also open to change. This idea is incredibly liberating for the new year because it reminds us that we are not trapped by the roles and labels that society or even we have placed upon ourselves. It encourages us to reflect on how we perform different aspects of our identity, whether in our gender, work roles, or relationships, and think about how we might want to rewrite these performances. Are there aspects of our identity that we feel compelled to conform to? Are there behaviors or expectations that we want to subvert? Butler's philosophy invites us to actively reshape our identities as we move forward, embracing a more fluid and open sense of self that is not bound by past assumptions or societal constraints. This approach can also enhance our empathy toward others, as we understand that each person's identity is shaped by complex, social forces rather than being fixed or predetermined. In this way, we become more open to understanding the identities of those around us and recognizing the diversity of human experience. 2. The ethics of vulnerability. In Precarious Life, Butler delves into the concept of vulnerability as an essential aspect of human existence. She argues that all human beings are inherently vulnerable, not just because of physical fragility, but because our lives depend on others. This shared vulnerability, Butler suggests, is the basis for ethical relations and for developing compassion. It is through acknowledging our vulnerability that we come to recognize our interdependence with others. For 2025, Butler's insights on vulnerability offer a profound way to approach the new year. Acknowledging vulnerability, both in ourselves and others, can help us develop a more compassionate, inclusive approach to relationships. Instead of seeing vulnerability as a weakness, we can view it as a powerful tool for fostering empathy. Understanding that everyone, no matter their social standing or public persona, is fragile in some way helps us step beyond judgments or assumptions. By accepting that vulnerability is not something to be ashamed of, we can engage in deeper, more honest relationships, whether with friends, family, or strangers. In a world that often prizes strength and individualism, Butler's philosophy calls on us to recognize the power in acknowledging our fragility and the interconnectedness that comes with it. Embracing this shared vulnerability can also make us more resilient as we work collectively to address social issues such as inequality, climate change, and human rights violations. 3. Disrupting norms for social change. One of Butler's most significant contributions to philosophy is her theory of performativity, which suggests that social norms are not inherent truths but are constructed through repeated performances. Since norms are not fixed, they can be challenged and deconstructed. This perspective enables individuals and groups to act as agents of change, disrupting harmful or restrictive norms through daily acts of resistance and redefinition. For the new year, this idea encourages us to think about how we can challenge the norms that govern our lives, whether in our personal lives, our workplaces, or society at large. Are there norms that restrict our freedom, creativity, or inclusivity? Can we challenge outdated expectations of gender, race, or success? Butler's philosophy teaches us that we don't need to wait for permission or formal power to subvert harmful systems. Through everyday acts of resistance, we can disrupt the status quo. This idea applies not only to social justice movements but also to our daily lives. For instance, we can challenge gender stereotypes in how we raise children or how we engage with others in social situations. It may also involve pushing back against societal pressures regarding success and happiness, where we recognize that societal norms often leave little room for individuality or alternative ways of living. By embracing a more fluid, resistant approach to norms, we can open up space for more inclusive, diverse, and compassionate ways of being. 4. Interdependency and collective action. Butler's work emphasizes the importance of interdependency, particularly in how we think about social justice. In her view, no individual can thrive in isolation. We are all interconnected, and our actions have consequences for others. She challenges the modern ideal of self-sufficiency and instead promotes a vision of collective action, where people work together to address systemic issues like poverty, racism, and inequality. In 2025, this perspective on interdependency encourages us to think more deeply about how we engage with the world. Are we contributing to the greater good? Are we helping to dismantle systems of oppression, or are we complicit in their perpetuation? Butler's philosophy challenges us to see our personal well-being as tied to the well-being of others. This means that in the new year, we can focus on building community, fostering collaboration, and embracing collective solutions to the pressing problems of our time. For example, we might engage in volunteer work, support businesses that align with our values, or use our platforms to advocate for justice and equality. By understanding that our fates are intertwined, we can become more committed to taking collective action to address the challenges we face. 5. Resisting the pressure to be happy. In a culture that prizes constant positivity and the pursuit of happiness, Butler's philosophy provides a much-needed critique. She suggests that the ideal of happiness is often used to shame people who are struggling or suffering. Moreover, the constant pressure to be happy can prevent us from acknowledging the complexities of life, such as grief, frustration, and disappointment. Butler's philosophy invites us to resist the societal pressure to always be happy, and instead embrace the full range of human emotions. This is liberating because it allows us to live more authentically, without the burden of constantly trying to meet an impossible standard. In 2025, we can approach life with more acceptance, recognizing that struggles are part of the human experience and that we don't have to constantly mask our emotions or feel compelled to live up to unrealistic expectations of joy. This doesn't mean giving up on happiness altogether. Rather, it means cultivating a deeper, more nuanced relationship with life, accepting that happiness and suffering coexist, and that both are important parts of the human condition. By embracing the full spectrum of our emotions, we can foster a sense of authenticity and peace that comes from accepting ourselves as we are. 6. The power of speech and language. Language is a central theme in Butler's work, particularly in her theory of performativity. According to Butler, words are not mere reflections of reality, they actively shape and create that reality. The way we speak about gender, race, power, and justice can either reinforce harmful norms or open up new possibilities for social change. For the new year, Butler encourages us to reflect on the power of our words. Whether in our personal relationships, professional lives, or public discourse, the language we use shapes the way we perceive the world and the way the world perceives us. Are we reinforcing stereotypes or contributing to a more inclusive, open conversation? Are we mindful of the words we choose and their impact on others? One way to apply this philosophy is by being more deliberate in our speech, choosing words that reflect our values and foster inclusivity. In social and professional interactions, we can aim to use language that challenges harmful stereotypes, promotes respect, and fosters understanding. In doing so, we can contribute to reshaping the social fabric and create a more just world. 7. Rethinking power and resistance. Butler challenges traditional views of power, suggesting that it's not just something that is held by the powerful but rather something that circulates through society and can be resisted at multiple levels. Resistance, for Butler, is not just about direct confrontation, it can also be about subverting the norms, values, and practices that sustain oppressive systems. For 2025, Butler's philosophy invites us to rethink power dynamics in our daily lives. Whether in our work environments, family structures, or broader social systems, we can look for ways to resist oppressive or unjust power structures. Resistance might take the form of speaking out against injustice, supporting marginalized communities, or simply refusing to comply with norms that perpetuate inequality. Butler's approach to power also emphasizes the importance of small, everyday acts of resistance. These can be seen in the way we choose to treat others, the language we use, or the ways we challenge institutional norms. In 2025, we can look for opportunities to resist power imbalances in our everyday actions, creating ripples that lead to larger societal changes. 8. Embracing the politics of mourning. Butler explores the concept of mourning in works like Precarious Life, where she examines how societies respond to loss, particularly in the context of violence and tragedy. She argues that mourning is not just a personal or private experience but also a deeply political one. How societies mourn, who is allowed to mourn, and whose loss is acknowledged or erased, reveals underlying power structures and social inequalities. For Butler, mourning is also a process of recognizing the humanity of others, especially those whose lives are often undervalued or overlooked. In the new year, we can apply this idea by reflecting on the ways in which we acknowledge grief and loss, both personally and collectively. Are we giving space for the mourning of those whose lives are often marginalized or ignored? Are we recognizing the collective loss in the wake of social injustices, environmental degradation, or economic inequality? By embracing mourning as a political act, we can create space for healing and solidarity, not just for those who have experienced personal loss, but for entire communities and nations grappling with collective grief. This can also lead to deeper engagement with social justice, as we move beyond surface-level sympathy to truly address the underlying causes of suffering and loss in the world. 9. The role of resistance in everyday life. Butler often emphasizes the importance of resistance in her work, suggesting that resistance is not just about large-scale political movements but also about the small, everyday actions that challenge dominant systems of power. Resistance, for Butler, is embedded in the way we live our daily lives, the choices we make, the ways we interact with others, and how we relate to the social systems that govern us. In the context of 2025, this lesson calls us to think about how resistance manifests in our everyday lives. Small acts of resistance might involve challenging oppressive language, questioning hierarchical structures in our workplaces, or supporting local movements that promote environmental or social justice. Resistance can also take the form of creating alternative spaces for community, joy, and creativity that subvert the dominant culture of individualism and consumerism. For example, resisting the pressure to conform to unrealistic beauty standards or consumer expectations can be an important form of self-liberation. Choosing to support sustainable practices or ethical businesses, rather than those that exploit workers or harm the environment, can be another way to enact resistance. By thinking of resistance as something that is woven into the fabric of daily life, we can create a continuous flow of positive change in our personal and collective experiences. 10. Reimagining the future through radical hope. Butler's philosophy suggests that we should not just critique existing systems but also imagine new possibilities for the future. Radical hope, as she frames it, is the ability to envision alternative ways of living, loving, and organizing society in a way that radically challenges the current order. This kind of hope is not naive optimism but a critical and transformative hope that emerges out of deep dissatisfaction with the status quo. It involves imagining futures that are more just, more inclusive, and more equitable. In 2025, radical hope can inspire us to think beyond the limitations of our current circumstances and begin to imagine what a truly just and equal society might look like. It encourages us to challenge our assumptions about what is possible and to consider alternative ways of living, whether in terms of our political systems, economic structures, or social relationships. Radical hope involves not only envisioning a better future but also actively working toward it by taking concrete steps to dismantle oppressive structures and build new, more just systems. This philosophy invites us to think about the long-term possibilities for our communities and the world, even when the current moment feels disheartening. By engaging in collective actions that bring about meaningful change and by cultivating a mindset of possibility, we contribute to the creation of a future that is more aligned with our values of justice, equity, and compassion. Conclusion: a philosophy for action and hope. Judith Butler's philosophy offers a roadmap for navigating the new year in ways that are both personally transformative and socially impactful. By embracing mourning as a political act, recognizing the importance of everyday resistance, and cultivating radical hope, we can approach 2025 with a deep sense of purpose and commitment to creating a more just, inclusive, and compassionate world. Her work teaches us to engage with the world as it is, while also imagining and building the world as it could be, challenging norms, fostering empathy, and pushing for a more humane society.